Brandon.
Hey, Alan. So
And
this morning I was working on a lot of Frostgrave terrain, which is basically a bunch of fantasy buildings for our
uh
eventual return to playing with lots of people.
huh.
But while we're not gathering in large groups, we actually met up just one-on-one to get a game of the new edition of Frostgrave in.
Yeah, it was great. I was actually um, I was decently excited, but actually getting the book into my virtual hands was really got me pumped. So
Yeah.
and playing it even more.
So before we go on a giant long positive rant about the changes in second
Uh,
edition from first edition, I
yep.
guess we both bought electronic copies of the book, but you
Yep.
bought one for a reader, and I just bought the straight up PDF copy. So
Yes.
I guess with your copy, because I had made the error, and I'm willing to admit it was an error of buying the Kindle version,
Uh
which
huh.
just the reader for it I don't find that good, like the online reader or the
Uh
one on
huh.
my phone. So I did not make that mistake this time, and I went for the PDF version, and I was very happy with how that was formatted. But I guess you
Mm-hmm.
went for the reader version on Google.
Yeah. So just so you know, in this episode of Dice Over Everything, we're talking about Frostgrave Second Edition.
Yeah, we
So
are.
that's what we're going to be talking about all episode, and good and bad and mostly good,
Yeah.
mostly
What's
great,
changed?
good,
What
good,
stayed the
good, and a
same?
little bit of things. And this is one of the few things that I actually was a little bit disappointed in. Is overall the rules are great. There's great artwork. It got me super excited reading that stuff. Um, but the actual book, because I got the Google Books version, it was interesting because when I got the Google Books version of the first edition, I found actually the formatting was really good, and I wonder if the first edition in that you buy off of Google Books is just a straight PDF conversion, and then the second edition, it seems like it was, I don't know, maybe converted in whatever way that basically all the tables are messed up. So because it's trying to be a what do you call it, a multiple, I guess, phone size friendly version of reading the rules, where like every all of the layout are kind of are supposed to flow. um, it ends up, well, the problem is all the tables and stuff were not formatted well in that book, I guess, like you said, like just like how it happens in the Kindle version. So anytime there was a table as opposed to just text, it got messed up entirely, and it becomes like, your spanning of your table doesn't span correctly, and if the table was wide, it wouldn't display correctly, and any of the spell cards, they were just weird, like they would span multiple pages, so you literally are missing text, like the last word of the spell card was on the next page, and that I found it really wasn't that great. And then when I looked at your PDF version, I'm like, wow, this is awesome, right? Because I guess
Yeah, it's
PDF,
it's more like a
yeah,
real book. Yeah.
exactly, right. And any of those cards were spaced correctly. And yeah, if the format seems small, instead of trying to like reformat it onto multiple pages incorrectly, you just have to zoom in. But
Yeah,
at
with
least
electronic
zooming in
devices.
works.
Yeah, even electronic device, it's easy.
Yeah, exactly. You just pinch and zoom. So
Yep. So you
yeah,
also ordered a hard copy through our local game store. So you
yeah, of
won't
course.
have
That's
this
the one I'm
problem.
really looking forward to.
Yeah, because the art from what I saw just on the screen was actually quite
Mm.
nice. It's
Yeah.
different, a little bit different than the old style. I would say it's
Hmm.
maybe not as detailed, but the themes and the colors are all very beautiful.
Yeah, so I think, what's her name? Amy Amon Ra? Amon Ra?
Something like that.
Uh, so I did see her artwork in Dracula's America. I bought that book, not a hard copy, but a virtual copy of that book, and it was decent, but she's really improved. Like the her previous artwork was pretty good, but her artwork for Frostgrave second edition has really like gone another level. So I've really liked the look of the artwork. It's like it it sells kind of the setting. Yeah,
It
and
definitely does. And there's quite a bit of it in the book. It's
yeah,
not like
and
3 or 4 pieces. There's like a good dozen, I'd
yeah, and
say.
I like some of the, I guess, designs. I don't know if I assume she's the one that designed the the costumes and that kind of look. And I thought they were interesting in some ways, more interesting than the previous artwork. Which you know what? Actually, that's not necessarily even true. The other artwork, like the Chronomancer, a lot of the different wizards were very interesting. Maybe it's just like the rendition of them, or the maybe the character in terms of the 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 way that they're there's just something but different that's kind of interesting in the way that the characters are portrayed in this one. Um, I will say overall, if I had to judge, I do like the previous artist better.
Agree.
I think there's there's more dynamism. I think in the previous the way that the previous artist rendered the characters, so they felt
Mhm.
more
It felt more
flowing
human.
and natural,
Yeah. Okay.
right? The new artist, although like the art is cool, the way that they act is a bit characterful. I feel like they're still a little bit stiff. It, even though like it's good
They
art, it's
feel,
a little bit
they
stiff,
feel
relatively
they feel a
speaking,
bit
compared
more.
to the previous. Yeah,
Yeah, they feel a bit more flat.
yeah. So whereas the previous artist was, they're really good in placing the characters in like a 3D kind of landscape with the other person, with a lot of movement, and so I did like that kind of look. But again, the second one is really good, and I feel like, um, uh, yeah, it's just great artwork, and of course, it's all new artwork, which is amazing. That like didn't reuse any pieces. It's all new stuff, which is awesome.
So on the note of actually printing stuff out, I ended up printing out from the PDF copy all the spell cards. Because when you play
Uh-huh.
the game, you need to have some hard copies in front of you. I find of some
Uh-huh.
stuff because just scrolling through your little phone is going to be a little too slow. So I printed off the encounter table with all the monsters that appear on different rolls, and the spell cards, and obviously the wizard sheets. And I guess maybe because before in the previous editions, the spell cards were all on Osprey's website under their game resources.
Hmm.
But I guess they haven't been updated yet. But at some point,
Well, they
they will be.
have. They have
Oh,
been
they have been.
updated. Yeah.
Ah, good, good.
Why did you update them yourselves? Yourself?
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
nice. Do they look prettier?
Uh,
Oh wow, you really just updated them. Oh,
yes, I
nice.
did.
Cool.
I didn't type it all out. Anyways, with the PDF, you can
Yeah.
export and reformat. And yeah, it
Uh-huh.
was mostly automatic. So I guess on the note of things that were printed out, the encounter table and things that have changed and not changed, the encounter table, which determines what monster appears when you pick up treasure, did not change in terms of like the type of monsters that appear and the likelihood of them
Yep,
appearing.
that's
That
right.
stayed the same. But what did change is how likely it is for a monster to come on.
Yes, which is amazing.
Because
Uh,
before we were house ruling that monsters come on more often because I believe you roll a d20, and
uh,
then on a 16 and up in Frostgrave first.
yeah, there's a
Is that what it is?
25% chance whenever you pick up a monster. So if anyone is wondering what we're talking about in general in Frostgrave, so the idea of Frostgrave is two wizards fighting it out, looking for treasure. Or fight, not looking for treasure, fighting over treasure, and the most coveted treasure is spells, right? So you're fighting over treasure, but in this like frozen, basically
Abandons.
post-apocalyptic magical fantasy city that is just thawing. So all of these wizards are basically tomb plunderers, like Indiana Jonesing it, trying to gather all the treasure from this previously dead city. However, as the city unfreezes, not only is the city accessible to humans, there's a lot of wandering monsters who show up to throw a monkey wrench in both of the opposing wizard sides. And so when we're playing, like any kind of war game, you have your normal like trying to overcome your opponent, but also these random monsters will show up to like try and kill you both.
Yes, and now they're twice as likely to appear. So it's 50-50
Yes,
to appear now?
more than twice as likely. So before it was 16 and up on the 20. Whenever you try and pick up a treasure, a random monster will come up and try to eat people from either side of on the table. Now it is 10 and up, so a little bit more than twice as often. Monsters are going to show up and try and like whenever you pick up a treasure and try and eat you.
And they also made some of the monsters more like a little bit better at fighting.
Yeah, that's actually yep.
Yeah, and especially some of the common ones. So.
Yeah, so like before a bear could show up, just like basically a grizzly bear, or maybe it's a polar bear. No, I think they're supposed to be grizzly bears. Could show up, and they were a little bit less intimidating. Basically, they were like a slightly worse barbarian. Now they are better than a barbarian, right? Yeah. Like generally, if a bear is fighting Conan, Conan's going to lose in the new edition.
In this edition,
yes.
You have to really buff him. You have to have magical Conan.
Yeah, you gotta exactly. That Conan better have a magical sword.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that I guess basically Joe McCullough, the person that wrote Frostgrave, I guess he saw or as he played, just generally how people liked to play the game and what people really enjoyed, and probably what he enjoyed as well, right? And the wandering monsters kind of throwing a wrench as you're trying to pick up a treasure is like an interesting and fun kind of dynamic way that the game plays. And it's like normally you would think when you're trying to just win a game, you might not like the fact that there's this random monster or this random thing that happens that could possibly just destroy your best laid plans. But I found, I don't know if it's our group or in general, the way that the Frostgrave game plays, it's very kind of cinematic. And so I've never really seen people get really upset by a wandering monster show up. In fact, they're even more excited. The more you play, the more excited you are when like the biggest, baddest monster shows up to screw over everyone.
Yes.
And everyone's like, Even
if it shows up behind you, you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy.
Yeah, it kind of because of the way the Frostgrave game plays, it's almost more like a shared storytelling, competitive storytelling. So it's exciting when like you're trying to get treasure and then, I don't know, the Lich Lord, like a powerful wizard and his retinue shows up to screw over both you and the opponent. It's just like they're so narrative and fun that you're totally great with it, right? To have that happen.
Yeah, it has a very, not just having the D&D like sort of magic scenario to it, but it actually has like some of the storytelling elements to it too.
Yeah. And so everyone seemed to really enjoy it. So it was like, all right, put more of it in. And I assume lots of people probably house ruled in lowering that number of how often monsters show up. So yeah.
Yep, and I think there was more of a mention. I don't think this was mentioned as much in the previous rules, but from how we played in our group, we would often play with 3 or 4 players per board. So there's even more of a storytelling back and forth element because there's more people interacting. And in this version of the rules, he made more of a mention about how to like set up the board, just talking about like using a larger board size and a few other things, knowing that people would actually play this way.
Yeah, so because so many people played multiple players, like more than 2, in the initial game, the rules were set up with the idea that it would just be one person against another. But the rules have now, through he basically folded in a lot of the expansion books and rules and kind of facts into this book. And part of that is making the game more clearly work with multiple players. And of course it can already work with multiple players, but just cleaning it up so it's it's very easy, and it's like literally in the rules and how you're supposed to play with 3 players or 4 players, right?
Yeah,
and to
less
make it work,
households.
which we all like for you and I think when we're playing Frostgrave 2, Frostgrave 1, sorry, um, we kind of just learn how to play, like the tweaks you need for the setup of the game to make it work with 3 or 4 players. And the base game works fine with 3 or 4 players, right? But
Yeah.
the setup has to change a bit. And we kind of just figured that out naturally, but like to have it well written in the rules right there, like is um, a great tool, especially because I think we've talked about this before. The best way to play Frostgrave is, I think, 3 players.
Yeah, I would agree. Like once you get 4 or more players, which we've done, especially with more than 4, the time it takes to go back around to your turn often gets to be a bit long. But
Yeah.
because there's everybody has 3 phases where they activate their troops on a given turn, it usually doesn't take too long. But if you have slower players and you go up to 5, then often you can feel like you're not doing very much in that in between time.
And again, this is the same kind of issue that you have if you play like Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, if the group gets too big. But the 3 players really, really works because also oftentimes what happens in a one-on-one game is that things could snowball, right? But with a 3-player game, naturally there's some balancing because if one person is playing ahead, the other 2 will obviously both kind of naturally kind of team up to kind of balance that out, right? Yeah. So it's a great
the balancing mechanic
overall,
because
exactly.
The game itself doesn't have really balancing mechanics built in, but when you put the multiplayers in, it basically
not in any one specific mission. Overall, the campaign actually has introduced ways to balance out, like because Frostgrave, also one of the great things about Frostgrave, and part of what makes it so narrative is that there's the games are all connected, right? It's a campaign play where your character after every game gets treasure and gets experience and levels up. So there are rules actually now in the game, which were missing in the first edition without the supplements, to balance out if you start with a much higher level wizard than your opponent. Let's say you just did a lot better in the game, so you got more experience. Then there's balancing ways. Basically, you get the weaker player gets free wandering monster creatures that they can basically use to help balance out the difference in power level.
Yeah, it's a fun way of doing it.
Yeah. And another thing kind of that helps balance out that pulling away of one wizard over a weaker wizard is the change. There's actually been a lot of changes just to the campaign play and the setup of your warband.
Yeah. So before, like you keep gathering gold. When you gather treasure, it often gives you gold, and you would spend that gold towards either items or towards new soldiers. Like if your soldiers die, you can replace them, or just replace your starting soldiers with better ones.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I guess we'll talk about the shooting part later, but they've now divided the types of soldiers into your standard soldiers and then your specialist soldiers.
Yeah.
Did I use the right name for the standard ones?
Yep, standard and specialist. So the idea is basically, as I've listened to a bunch of podcasts with Joe in them, and basically one of the major problems with snowballing on a larger scale is if one of the wizards starts getting a lot more treasure and experience than the opposing wizard at the beginning of a campaign, they can kind of become way more powerful than the weaker wizard, because you can then just buy all the best mercenaries, right?
Yeah.
Now,
rather than your team having 10 health each, now all your guys have 12 to 14 health, as opposed
and they
to
fight better,
mm-hmm.
and all this kind of stuff, right? And then the other thing is every single soldier cost gold. So if you ended up having 0 gold and you lost a couple of guys, you could even be having fewer members in your warband, where your opponent has more members of the warband and all the members of the warband are stronger. Even though the wizards themselves might be close in power level,
mm-hmm.
the warbands overall could be significantly different. If basically you had like 8 knights and the opponent just has 7 thugs, you're in for a bad time.
Yeah, that's the it'll snowball, as we said, as
Yeah.
that
So
possibility.
how Joe kind of fixed that and also added in a lot more. Well, we can talk about it a little bit more, but like basically, like you said, all the troops are divided into standard and specialists, and you can only have 4 specialist soldiers and 4 standard soldiers. So
So
and some of the
specialists,
standard soldiers are free, so you never like get outnumbered. If you like all your guys die, you can also you can basically just always convince some thugs or thieves to join your warband to go and like get a cut of the treasure, right, as you're going and fighting, which can really help balance if your team got massacred in a terrible battle that just didn't work
you
out for
rolled
you.
really badly for their injuries, and they all just
Yeah,
succumbed.
yeah,
Yep. So
and then they
now with
can't
how
outnumber you. Yeah, sorry.
oh yeah,
Yep.
you can talk about the implications more before we go into more
Yeah,
detail.
yeah. So the other thing that I really liked is there was another issue in the older versions of the game with ranged combat being really, really powerful. And I think
Yeah,
that ranged combat
that's what I
should be
was going to
powerful.
mention.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But now the only way you can get a ranged combat is like every ranged combat unit, except for the Javelineer, is now a specialist soldier.
So you can
So
top out 4 of them if you take
yeah,
all your specialists as the range
and
type.
yeah, and now you don't, and also like the most tanky units and the most like best in melee units are also uh, specialists. So if you take a knight, you're not going to have 4 archers or 4 rangers or whatever, right? So you can't. And what's kind of interesting in that is that it kind of makes the ranged combat of the wizard even more important.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. We found that in the game that we played because I played totally different than usual. I just wanted to try some new stuff out because it was going to be a one-off game rather than a whole long campaign. So I'm like, okay, I'll just
Yeah,
play all spells I've never used before and in a totally different way, which involved not taking a lot of shooting spells. And I find it's a big handicap, especially when you don't have as many shooting units on the board, not to be
yeah.
able to just like reach out and shoot off that one thing.
Yeah,
So
so now like going heavy ranged really impacts how you play. And if you're going heavy ranged, you might want to have to supplement your ranged combat with your wizards having ranged combat. Because that way, you're because you can get so much less range. The fact that you can make your wizards also have ranged combat in a pinch
yeah.
uh, is a bigger impact, right? Because you can't rely on all of your normal troopers to be shooting people for
Yeah,
you.
so before you often wanted to have 1 or 2 shooting spells, but maybe it wasn't 100% necessary. But now I think it is 100% necessary to give your wizard some sort of range damaging spell.
I
I
don't think
found it
it's
was very,
100% necessary. I think it depends on your the way your play style is. And
yeah,
I think for the way you play, generally, yes, I think you want a ranged combat, right? So to have range supremacy, yeah, you need your wizards to have ranged. So
yeah,
I like that, and it's interesting because basically it forces um, a lot more use of a lot of different units, and uh, it means that the strategies you use are almost like more important because you only have 4 specialist soldiers, so you can't just get all of the different specialist soldiers of all the different types. You kind of have to choose: is my warband going to be more ranged, have a stronger range presence, or are they going to be more about like holding the line with a bunch of knights, or are they going to be like quick at getting treasure and taking them away with a bunch of
some rangers and
uh,
treasure
rangers and
hunters.
treasure hunters, exactly, right? And that's
Yeah,
that I find really interesting, especially because like treasure hunters were really good in the previous one, but now actually they're like the literally now the best unit to pick up treasure and leave. So so that I find interesting.
yeah, yeah. Trackers might be good too because they're speed 7 and they can shoot things as they try and chase them down. So,
Yeah, yeah, but they get a
but they don't.
-1. So of the 7 move units, when you pick up a treasure, you get a -1 fight if you have a bow or a two-handed bow, a shield, or a two-handed weapon.
Yeah,
So
and the
because
tracker has
yeah,
less
tracker
fight
has
than
his,
the
yeah, yeah, exactly. So even though the tracker and the ranger are just as fast as the treasure hunter, they have less fight, and you get an even less fight due to getting a -1 when they pick up treasure. Whereas the treasure hunter maintains its +3 fight for like avoiding getting shot by arrows as it's running away, or fighting off people as it's running away with the treasure, which is
and often you
a
just try
great
and run away
change.
at full speed.
Yeah, and that kind of balances the fact that treasure hunter lost one fight because of the honestly kind of broken nature of two-handed weapons, which used to give an additional +1 fight. So the treasure hunter used to be +4 fight, which was ridiculous. Which technically in our local games we already put that fix in to make the treasure hunter only 3 fight.
Yeah, now the treasure hunter only has a hand weapon, so it's not a two-handed weapon anymore. Or I don't know if it was.
No, it didn't get the +1 fight for a hand weapon and dagger.
Yeah,
which you used to get.
Yes. There we go.
Yeah, so a lot of these things basically you'll see like throughout the entire game little niggling things in the old rules. Like a lot of them have been like cleaned up. All of the updates in the books that made sense to go into the main rules have been put into there. So now you can have a one-stop shop for all the greatest rules on, in our opinion, the best way to play, right? Like all of the modifications that we needed to do to the base game to make it work for us, which is like for people that are playing 3 players and or 4 players, multiple players, and to make it generally balanced and to have more monsters, all those things are now in the main rules. So like it's great, right? It works. It really makes it easy, I guess, for new people to play in the way that, in our opinion, was the best way to play, right? It's now core of those ways.
Yeah, so the other part about the ranged being limited to maximum 4 shooting units that I found we had to come up with house rules for when we were playing 3 or 4 players is that we basically had a gentleman's agreement that we wouldn't play with more than 3 or 4 ranged units per person because if one unit went into the middle to get treasure, now you have several players surrounding them with all their ranged units. They have nothing else to shoot but the guy who's risked himself to go get the treasure. So if you started playing a warband like with 7 shooters in it, then now you would just gun down anything that like went out in the open. Whereas that's now been addressed by limiting the special soldiers to 4. So
we kind of like, in my opinion, the best warband was like 7 rangers and a knight, which you just can't do anymore.
No.
So a knight to make sure that they don't just rush your wizards and kill them, and then 7 rangers to like both pick up treasure and
And if the wizard walks out in the open, you've got 7 rangers. At one point, you're going to roll an 18, 20 something and just
just murder them. Yeah, exactly. So I really liked all of that kind of change, right? And there was definitely some mitigating factor. The more terrain you put on, but I feel like a lot of players never have enough terrain, right? A lot of just for judging like from the way like from the posts online, and honestly even from when we started playing, we just didn't put enough terrain on the board. And now in the rules it's a lot more clear saying there should be tons of terrain. Like in the game there's basically an effective max range of 24 inches for archers and stuff, but
the board's not that big, so it's not a huge restriction.
36. It's 36, so there's still somewhat of a restriction, but in the rules, literally now, he says that on the ground level of Frostgrave, you shouldn't have that many like paths that are more than 12 inches long, right? So now it's like a lot more clear about what he expected Frostgrave to be. It's literally a city, right? It's like a packed, dense city filled with like ice and whatever as you walk through. And if you want to be able to shoot 12 inches, you might have to climb up onto a building to shoot down on people, right?
Yep.
Which I think is great. Like the way, like we kind of figured that out, but that's because we played a lot of Frostgrave, right? Like over years, we finally figured out, you know what? This is the amount of terrain it makes for the game to really work.
Yep. So my suggestion for terrain, a quick one, is just build lots of walls because it gives you the feel of the ruined city. They're easy to pack away. They're not expensive to build, and there's lots of ways to build them out of like cheap materials. So just build lots of walls as your starting terrain. And
Yeah. So what other things? There's also, I guess, two of the other remaining biggest things, and I think something that a lot of the older players were would be really excited, or in some ways would be the most excited about, is the new spells and the new missions. So you want to talk a little bit more about like spells and why the new spells and like how they've been worked in is really great.
Yes, so before there were some spells that never got used,
Mm-hmm.
and I think those got sorted out a little bit, and some of the shooting spells were also possibly a little too good, or
Mm-hmm.
some of the shooting spells that weren't the really good ones,
Mm-hmm.
because
Or like
comparatively
just terrible.
they were terrible compared to the good ones, and they might have just
Yeah.
been terrible overall because they didn't accomplish very much. But the
Uh-huh.
crappy ones were brought up a bit in power, and then the obviously best ones were brought down a little bit. So that
Yeah.
was a good change to all the shooting spells. I think I
Yeah.
went. Mhm.
I what so yeah, so the entire, basically he went through all the spells and kind of balanced out the spells, so it now feels like in two ways. Like you said, any spell that was too bad he brought up or even just replaced with a new spell, and then any spell that was too strong he just brought that power down a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
So
so what ended up happening is like yeah, now when I look at the list, it's like I think there's still some spells that are not that good, but it's like three or four spells now, right? And even those three or four spells, I need to try them out to make sure, right? Whether they're good or bad before, right? To me, this is like a great addition. Basically, if you're like, there's just so many, just by replacing or improving the spells, right, and also making certain spells not just make other spells useless. It's just enlarged the number of spells that you can use, right? And Frostgrave is a game about these two wizards leading warbands, kind of crush, like fighting each other over treasure, right? So the spells are critical for the game to work really well, right? That's where the strategy and the story and everything comes from. So just enlarging that, not by giving even more spells, which can kind of be confusing because there's too many options,
yeah,
but by just
there's already 80 spells, so it didn't need more spells.
it just need better, more useful, like, well, making all of them useful or almost all of them useful. I think I said three or four spells that I'm still not sure about. But
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that was great, and he did quite a good job. Um, the other thing is the new missions, which is just like, it's just great. Like when you're buying a book now, like if I feel like if you're just a brand new person and you're wondering what we're even talking about because we're always referencing this previous edition which you never played, like just think about it that this new edition is cleaner, to like the rules are cleaner, it has multiple players, which a lot of miniature games don't do well. Well, this
Yeah, that's a
game
big selling
allows three
point.
or four players, get a bunch of your friends, come together and play it. Uh, the spells are and the warband are much better balanced, right? A lot of the yeah the
You don't have to buy a pile of books to play it. Like with 40K, you've got to buy your pile of codexes and other stuff, which
yeah
was almost slightly the case with Frostgrave before, because there was to clean up the game, like the additional
mm-hmm.
books would add some of the rules that are now just built into this book.
yeah
So you don't need lots of books to play the game.
yeah. It's just a one-stop shop, and now it has like literally 20 missions, different missions that have a different theme and a different story and everything. So it just really like um, you have so much gameplay in this book. Like just going through 20 missions, that's 20 games. That's like if you get through all of those missions, that's a lot of gameplay right there, and you get to experience your warband growing. It's great. I think this is totally worth the price, and the book is beautiful, right? The artwork is beautiful. It's really great.
You know, if we didn't mention before, the other expansion books are all the missions that come with them are all good.
Mm-hmm.
You may not need the other parts of them as much, but the missions are still completely viable from
Yeah, and he
the other
didn't
books.
invalidate. Yeah, he didn't invalidate any of the other books. Basically,
Not
all
the
of
whole book, but
yeah, basically every single book is has great content, like the missions and especially like thematic missions. I think we finished the Lich Lord, which is like I think it's the
10
crowd
missions long.
favorite, which is like 10 missions, right? And that itself is worth the price of that book, right? And then it adds a couple of units that you can add, right? So overall, like, yeah, I'm really impressed with this book and the amount of content that you get when you pick this up. And of course, this is like, in my opinion, my second favorite game out there. If not vying for the first, my first favorite, it's definitely top two of the games that I play, right?
Yeah.
Especially for the fact, I think what really helps it is the fact that you can play like 3 or 4 people on one table. It's really rare to do that well in miniature games.
Yeah, absolutely. It worked because it's a
Yeah,
skirmish game. It can work.
yeah, and of course, just like the relaxed storytelling gameplay, just helps assuage all of your try hard aesthetics. So everyone is not as like trying to they don't because of the way that the game kind of encourages you to play it's going to make you less likely to like rage and try to like just totally crush your opponent and not care about the story or that kind of thing. So it kind of encourages you just to play for fun, which is really like why we play these games.
Yeah, so in the first edition,
Mm-hmm.
like the leveling up of your wizard requires obtaining experience, and the first edition, a bunch of that experience would come from just straight up murdering your opponent through spells. But now that's been removed. You
Yeah,
no
so that
longer.
changed actually in like you talked about needing other books to play the previous book, and that actual change came in Maze of Malcor, which is one of the expansions. And so for the last, I think it's year or two, we've been playing with that kind of idea, right, of how we played. And I think actually we house ruled a change before that, or was it
Possibly.
just gentleman's agreement? It might have just been a gentleman's agreement not to get that much XP from.
Oh, we topped it out or something. Yeah, we didn't. We may not have decided all these before we even played the games. Sometimes we may have just made some changes
Yeah, we're just
after
like,
playing the
you know
games.
what, we don't like this. But like when it happened in Maze of Malcor, that just changed the entire dynamics of the game because it didn't make in the previous version of the game, it just made sense to make your wizard as good as possible at murdering your opponent's wizard
Yeah, rather
because you
than
got
doing
so much
cool.
XP from that. Yeah.
It wasn't, and yeah, it became less about manipulating the battlefield, less about buffing your soldiers, which is less complex. So it's not as interesting when you're just out there just using your magic gun to shoot everybody.
Yeah.
It's just not that deep. But now that you have to like think back and forth between if you're going to put a buff on a guy early in the game, it's going to act
Mm,
for the whole game. If you're going to try and
yeah.
slow their movement down through a certain area, like there's all
Yeah.
sorts. Once it's not about just leveling up like murder, the
Yeah,
game
but
becomes
through
more.
murder. Now you don't get that much leveling through murder. You get a bit, but not for murdering your opponent. So now the focus is all about getting the treasure or doing like every mission generally has a special uh,
There's special items on the
scenario,
board, things like that.
objectives, right? And now it's all about the objectives, which changes the entire gameplay, right?
Yeah, yeah. Now the
And
mission's more important, which is I really like that
yeah,
style of game.
yeah.
So do we want to
Yeah,
talk
and
much
also
about?
that really helps because if you're not the type of person that just wants to like murder your opponent, you can still enjoy Frostgrave, right? You can almost enjoy Frost. You can enjoy Frostgrave with even if you don't like the idea of crushing your opponent to dust, because the best war bands are actually the ones that can just complete the objective and leave, even sometimes even with the fewest amount of casualties, like the fewest attempts at murdering your opponent as possible. Like a
Yes.
totally viable warband is one that just is fast at going up, getting the treasure, or doing the objective and getting out as fast as possible.
Yeah,
Right?
that's how I used to play a lot in the first edition. My
Yeah.
my forces would take very little damage,
Yeah,
Basically,
and it
like
wouldn't kill that
intimidate
much
the.
stuff. Don't try to kill that stuff. Kill the enemy. Just grab the treasure and go.
Well, yeah, you bring enough guys to intimidate your opponent like
Uh,
around that treasure, and they're like, oh, it's not worth this fight because it's
yeah,
not about fighting to the death. It's about fighting for treasure. So if you sent
yeah,
5 guys in and then 2 guys to go fight them off, they don't they don't get anything from killing you. So they just like, oh, I'll just leave this to you, and they go do
yeah.
something else.
And don't get me wrong. Also, another viable warband is you kill your opponent and then pick up the treasure after they're dead, after they can't fight back. So there is, you can still, if you are into murdering, you can still play that. But if you're not into murdering and you're just into like being sneaky and getting the stuff, almost like a thief, a magical thief, that also is a great way to play. And the fact that it has these different styles of play really helps make the game
It can appeal to a really big
approachable to so
audience.
many different people. Yeah.
And just more replayability if you want to play a different way. Like, oh, I've been playing
Yeah,
like the more
raiders.
battlefield manipulation through
Yeah.
building walls and making mud to slow my opponent down. You just want to play a different way where you're going to like move the treasure, make your guys invisible, or make yourself like more hard to hit. You've got that option open to you.
Yeah, or murderating. So I have to say that another time. Or murderating your opponent, or buffing your. But even the different types of murdering your opponent, you can be like, I'm going to buff up my soldiers so that they can go in and, like we said, Conan can have his magic sword and his magic armor and be possessed by a demon, so that he can just like cut a bloody swath through your opponent's army. Or you can be like throwing fireballs and if your opponent sticks his head out, he catches a fireball. So he's got to back off and be worried about that.
Yeah, whereas you played in our first game of it as the Necromancer that just keeps summoning all sorts of different demons. You can't summon multiple of the same
Undead,
demon.
not demon.
Undead.
Yeah,
not
because
demon.
there is also someone who summons demons who does a similar thing but summoning demons. Yeah.
So you can basically like summon things to the battlefield all over the place. Not the same thing repeatedly, as I said, but you basically increase your numbers.
Yeah, just to annoy the opponent and almost like harass them until they get to exhaustion, and then you can try and like take the treasure off them as they're like basically exhausted, which is what happened, right? And do you want to talk about our impressions of the game that we played?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, so we played a game. We rolled up some guys, tried out a lot of these roles. We did use warbands where we could try out a lot of the different spells, and right off the bat, 2 things kind of were interesting. Is that I couldn't use as many ranged units for my first warband as I normally would. And then the second thing is the apprentice is a little bit better is just overall a little bit better. And
he's a little more health.
Yeah, he has more health, and in the game you can spend health to cast your spells. So he's a little bit better at casting spells because of that. It was just again, it's almost like the game is just more emphasizing on spells, right? On the wizards, right? And then all the spells I took, like none of the spells I took were duds. Like I took some interesting new spells that I was wondering about, and some old spells that I hardly ever used before. And because some of the overpowered spells were like not overpowered anymore, it encouraged me to use some of these spells that were like were decent, but just not as good as some of the other ones. So in terms of like you were saying, like the Necromancer, I was playing a Necromancer, the ability just to summon things to bug your opponent so they can't just run away. Like throughout the game, I kept on summoning zombies, and I used so basically the idea is my Necromancer would summon all these different, possible creatures. So I summoned zombies to come and harass you. And of course you cut them down easily, but I kept on summoning them.
Yeah, I couldn't leave with the treasure because I had to do a round of fighting, and then another one would appear from either the wizard or the apprentice, which would then have to be fought off.
And not just that, but there's Bones of the Earth, which was always a decent spell, but because
yes, the skeleton hand that reaches up from the ground to grab you,
stops you from moving away. because there are not the other spells that were just like direct damage and stuff that kind of overshadowed them, I was like, actually, this is a pretty good spell. So just by there not being overpowered spells, it made Bones of the Earth a much better pick. And I got to play it, and it was interesting, right? Like I locked down a couple of people by summoning these so they couldn't run away. And another one, and then a new spell, right, where they replaced a spell, a previous spell, is Animated Skull, which means that now you could throw a really weak uncontrolled creature, so it's like a monster, 6 inches away, right? And it's just this animated skull that runs after people and tries to bite them. But like as soon as it takes damage, it just dies, right? And it's not a good fighting. But again, like you said, it just stopped you from running away. You had to take that turn to like smack it in the head, right? Which was really interesting. And by the fact that it was only 6, you could only throw it 6 inches, it also made it interesting because my wizards had to get pretty close to you to actually use that spell.
Yes, they did, which meant you probably wanted to have their enemy tied up before you started tying them up more.
Yes, exactly. So it was important to have the zombies to run or the forward, so that even though my wizard was pretty close to you, you couldn't just like kill him because of that. So that was, I really like that. Like, and now it changed the dynamic of the Necromancer, right? It was really enjoyable, right? The new spells and the old spells. It really did feel like
you could build more of a theme to your wizard rather than having to make sure you just relied on the same thing.
Yeah, the same spell, casting it over and over. And I did cast like a bunch of spells multiple times, but at the same time, I think of all the spells I chose, right? You started off with 8 spells. I think I said I tried to cast every single one of my spells. I failed some. I failed 2 of them, right? Trying to cast them. But I literally, throughout the game, I tried to cast every single one of my spells, which is great, right? Whereas before, if you had like a really strong spell, you would just spam that spell. But there were points where I wanted to cast every single one.
Yeah, so I think there was only one spell where I never cast, because that spell was Suggestion, which is one of the new ones, where you make your enemy just drop the treasure they were carrying and then walk a little away. But because you picked up treasure that wasn't really in my view or close enough that I could do much to it, it just wasn't that necessary.
Yeah.
Also, I was relying heavily on Mind Control, because Mind Control competes with that spell, where rather than just telling the person to drop it, you tell them, bring it to me.
Yes, and then drop it.
Yeah, it depends what school of wizard you've got, too. That your school may not take both of those. So if a particular school doesn't want both of those, then
but there is something with Suggestion. Like, there's 2 things that make, even though you have Mind Control as it's called what was your guy called?
It was a Soothsayer.
Yeah, so Soothsayer has Mind Control, which is super powerful. And it's just as powerful as it has been since, I don't know, again, like, it used to be Mind Control was not very good, but again, there was some sort of expansion that basically allowed any spell that uses will to need to have a minimum so basically whenever you cast certain spells, some of them can be resisted by the opponent. And so there was a change and it's variable depending on the roll you cast, but there was some change that made the minimum will roll needed by a person to resist the spell 14. And at that point, Mind Control became awesome, right?
Yeah.
And it's still as strong as it was ever. Well, it's actually a little bit weaker because you can't just walk off the table and get the treasure anymore.
That's true.
You can't Mind Control a guy and then walk off, which is great.
That's quite important. That's quite an important change.
But it's still a very, very strong spell. But I found like, even with that, it still makes sense sometimes to have Suggestion for 2 reasons. Suggestion, if you Mind Controlled one person, you can't Mind Control a second person.
Not without giving the first one up, no. So you might want to keep your
Mind Controlled lackey, yeah. And then then if you have suggestion as well, then you can still use that spell to affect other people, even if you had mind control. And I do remember this being a deal with one of my soothsayers in the first edition, where I would mind control one person, and until that person broke mind control or ran off the board, I basically had no attack spell because that was like my only attack spell. So I had to like, so having two different ways to affect the board, even if you have your mind control up, is really useful. And the second is suggestion works on your friendly units. So it can literally give you additional movement.
Yes, it can.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing. Like Joe's really thought about like the second edition. It's really most of the spells on every single wizard make sense, right? Like every single spell is useful and different depending on your wizard and what access you have to. I could see myself choosing any of these spells depending on the spells that I really want to take. It might mean that I want to choose,
you may want some
almost any of the spells.
You might want some buff spells you use early in the game before you actually start like the main combat part and start shooting each other. So you get a couple buffs up in the first 2 rounds as you're running up. And then as the combat starts, you start shooting like your fireballs, your mind controlling things across the board. So like in each stage of the game, different things can happen.
Yeah, and if you don't have, like generally you want some sort of movement thing to move yourself faster. But if you're a soothsayer and you don't have, or because you only have a certain number of spells to start off with 8, you don't necessarily want to take all of one type of you still need a movement buff, and suggestion could be the movement buff you take, right, to get that extra 3 inches, right?
Yeah, so you could take fleet feet, but you could also just make do with suggestion.
Exactly, use suggestion and then take and use that other spell slot to take a spell that you really need, let's say fog, so that you can stop people from seeing things, or maybe you want to use a couple of those Chronomancer spells that were really not good. They really buffed them up. So you might want to end up taking
like Time Walk that got a big buff.
Yeah, Time Walk exactly.
Had very little use, but now I see it could be very interesting.
Yeah, Time Walk literally used to be just if you wanted to move an extra 6 inches. Or extra 3.5 inches. That's all it basically did. And now it allows you to cast 2 spells in 1 turn.
Yes.
That's a huge buff.
At the cost of not moving the rest of your army. But if your army, like for a late game, the rest of your army might be like run off the board with treasure or just beaten down, you're now like, I don't need,
well, there's so many combos that can happen, but in 1 turn, you can cast multiple spells, right?
Oh yeah, when you can move in and out, when you can not like leave yourself exposed at the end of your turn, is big.
Yeah, so so that's the kind of thing, right? So like I said, so many spells, almost all of them are useful. That really added a lot to the game. We did play a new mission. The new mission was fun. It was interesting. And again, like one of the great things, like because the game is about storytelling, any kind of new mission, like it's new rules, but because it's only on that one mission, it's not something you really have to memorize. So like in a lot of miniature games, there's a lot of like the interest comes from the special rules in the core game. And that means that to play the game, you need to memorize a lot of stuff. But because Frostgrave is more narrative, a lot of the interesting rules that makes every single mission you play interesting is rules for the mission itself, which means you only have to remember, like you can remember the core set of rules, which are relatively less complicated. And then you only need to remember the rules for any one mission. Like a lot of the things that add that special spice is from the mission rules. And then you can just learn those mission rules themselves, right, for that mission, and you don't have to memorize it because next time you're going to play a different mission. Yep. And it also helps keep things fresh because now there are like, it's got to be over 100 missions at this point.
Probably, if you've got 20 from the base book, then 10 from Thought Lichlord, you're at 30. And how many other books have come out?
Maybe you're not at 100. I don't think you're at 100.
6 other books with like
they don't all, some have 10, some have 6, some have 12. So I'm not sure where you're at 100, but it's a lot anyways. Like we've played quite a bit of Frostgrave, and we haven't played all the missions.
Oh
So
no. All right. So maybe on to some more like technical things. So in this edition, he implemented a lot more limits to things for your
mm,
bonuses. That many things will like you get bonuses for having more guys in combat, putting spell buffs on, and your just the base abilities of the soldiers.
hmm
So now like your maximum fight plus bonus has been capped out at plus 10, I
yeah,
believe. So
yes, and I really like this. I really like that specific cap because it helps. Um, so there's two things, right? Generally, you're not going to get in general to 10, right? So first of all, it's not going to be a huge deal most of the time, but there are certain things where things got a little bit out of hand, right? If you got like a lot of bonuses, right? Like let's say you have a guy who has +7 fight and then you triple team someone, you get like a 14 a +14 or +15 bonus, and literally you almost certainly win the fight, and then because you have a +15 bonus, you're doing tons of damage. And
yeah.
so it kind of just brings the extreme things down, and
Mm-hmm.
by doing that, uh, again, just like the spells where the most powerful spells are brought down a notch, um, it means that the viable strategies, like even though it seems like it's a limit, it actually increases the number of viable strategies that you can use to play the game, because it's less likely that like trying to just super buff someone to go and kill things is super powerful, right?
Yeah, you're no longer aiming just to build up a one-shot kill troop, which
Mm,
can be extremely effective, or just trying to like shoot from tons of guys. You can now like make more use of strategy
yeah.
because the fights are going to be more even, a little more even.
And to be fair, this generally didn't come up, and even when it came up, it was generally only like +2 or +3 difference than how it is now. But one of the things I think that really that I think is kind of like, besides just the fact that it limits those few times where it gets kind of crazy, and kind of nips in the bud the idea of super buffing someone as a thing. It also means that it's just easier to calculate, because
At
to
a certain
get
point,
to,
at a
yeah,
certain point, you just stop counting. You're like, oh, I hit this number. Okay, I can stop counting my
yeah,
bonuses.
exactly. Like at a certain point, yeah, once you get to 10, you don't have to worry about it, and sometimes you can get a lot of bonuses, especially if you are outnumbering someone. So it just helps the game flow a little bit faster depending on your bonuses. And again, of course, it's on the edges, but I felt like it's a decent thing to put in there. And also 10 is a nice number,
Yeah.
so
So
it's
the
easy to
other thing that
remember.
yes, it is. It makes the math easy. Everything else easy. The other thing for capping is you capped the amount of bonus you can get from teaming up on people,
Mm-hmm.
which I think was good in that things would come on different base sizes because it's miniature agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're playing with 25 millimeter bases or maybe like 40 millimeters, if you've got some giant like crocodile soldiers, it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be a big downside to the bigger soldier that he could be easily surrounded and it's just easier to get bonuses on the like things that
Yeah.
have bigger bases. Then now you're like, okay, there's a maximum number of people that are going to gang up for bonuses on one troop.
Yeah, so you get +6. So technically that's 4 people ganging up on one person. Now I
Yeah.
feel like this doesn't necessarily happen as much like army to army, but where it does change things decently is against boss monsters. So there's a bunch of missions where you're trying to kill a super buffed monster, uh, and actually it becomes, because they're not intelligent. Like when you're playing against an opponent, they know that you're trying to surround them with 5 guys. So they're not going to give you the chance to surround their, like, I don't know, important person with 5 guys. You can just steamroll them, right?
No,
And
they're
if you're
not going to.
doing that, then they'll just rush over and get the other treasures. But a dumb super boss monster is not smart, right? It doesn't
No.
have that strategy. It's like literally run by like a simple AI, right?
Yeah, it won't put a whole bunch of other troops into contact with you and then move in to make the final blow. It'll just walk at you with no bonuses and then
Exactly.
let you surround it so
with
that
like, and especially the boss monsters, people would generally use large bases for, let's say, a giant demon, and then you just surround them with your entire warband, get like plus 15.
on every single guy you're fighting with, yeah. So even
Yeah,
your
on the
little,
super boss.
even your thieves would start kicking him while he's down.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a giant evil like super big demon, and you basically just like dogpile the demon and kill him. Like even the thief is like stabbing him in the face for like 10 damage or something like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so now with only a maximum plus 6, that means that's still a lot, and in general that's not going to affect the general gameplay. But when you're fighting these boss monsters where it actually kind of happens a lot to outnumber it more than like basically to get plus 6 is 3 guys. That means that you're 4 guys on one, right? It happened a lot to have more than 4 guys on the super boss monster. So now it basically stops that kind of thing. And again, if that ever happens where,
Yeah, you might not even want to attack with your thieves. You may just want to attack with your better soldiers. Like you take your plus 6 and then like your plus 4 from your knights, your Templars, your barbarians, and you just attack with them. You maybe don't try your luck with the thieves on the giant boss demon. You surround him, but you don't try to
yeah.
fight.
So here's my question though. So now plus 6 is actually a big deal in some ways, because it means that, like you said, the thug can only get up to like plus 8, right? And the thief can only get to plus 7. But he also added in the plus 10 overall bonus issue. So my question is, in general, do you think that he needed that we need both of these limiters? When you think about it, like a thief is already a plus 7. Is it that big of a deal that they get the extra plus 3 to plus 10? Or is just the plus 10 limiter enough?
I think the gang up bonus is more important. But as you said before, like the plus 10 just allows you to cut some guy down right away. So
yeah, and it's true. In general, to get to plus 10, you generally needed the gang up bonus.
So I think they're serving different purposes, which makes me think that it's all right.
Again, though, like here's one of those things where the number of limits is just another thing someone has to remember, right? And so the question is, in general, when you're talking about a new player or even like the same player, right, the amount of effort they need to know or remember all the rules becomes a rules burden on playing the game that is not really the reason why people play miniatures games, right? People don't play miniatures games to remember all the rules. The rules are supposed that as much as like you want to free up your players to have to think about the specifics of the rules as little as possible so they can concentrate on the strategies and things like that, right? So if you already are having a plus 10 cap that is generally covering off the problems with gang up bonus, I just wonder if you really need the plus 6. Like I do agree, if you didn't have the plus 10, you would need the plus 6. But since you have the plus 10, I feel like they didn't need to have the plus 6 max. And that's just another thing you have to remember.
Well, the gang up bonus stops your basically garbage troops from becoming elite. So I think that's important. So
yeah,
I think the gang up bonus...
It does. And that is an interesting thing, right? So I could see that argument.
So, I think they have 2 different enough purposes that it's worthwhile. And they're core enough to the rules. It's not like some sort of corner situation. I think both are core enough to the rules that they're worth being there.
Okay. I guess the another thing is along the same lines, I do like the idea, like the tweaks and everything like that. And those 2 limits I thought were great. I guess this is one of the few small niggling things that that I'm still either tentative or even not as happy about is to help balance things. There were a lot of additions to limits on different rules or spells, right? And so, like we said here, like there's these 2 things on maximum combat bonus and gang up bonus. There's another thing with the ability to limit.
So the spells became more complicated. Like there's more rules involved in each spell now,
Mm,
which I think was for it helped add to the balance, but now each spell is much more complicated. And part of what I
yeah.
think you're getting
So
at is that to balance them, he adjusted range bands and adjusted it was a lot of range bands and then adjusted like conditions where they could be cast, which some of them are useful because you would need
yeah,
to address it in an FAQ otherwise, but some of
yeah,
them are just a balancing element.
yeah. And to me, like some of the range bands, I felt like I think range bands in general are good overall, but some of them I feel like um, when you're doing range bands, I felt like the actual distance to some of the range bands was a little bit too. There's too many different range bands. So there was like spells that are 3, 6, and then there's also though like 12.
There's probably some fours
There's
going on. Yeah.
14 and 16, and I think there was a fifth. Yeah, 14 and 16. So and there's 18, I believe. And I'm like, do you really need that many? Like it's one again, it's just one of those memory things. Like if you have specific breakpoints, in my opinion, you can clear off a lot of those balance things with not adding the memorization or specific cognitive load onto the player. Like the difference between 14, 12, 14, and 16, generally, as I saw the spells, I think a lot of those things could be broken down to like either 12 or 16.
Well, and as we
12,
talked about,
16, 24, and maybe 6, right? 6,
yeah,
12, 16, 24. I think that could cover off the balance issues with all the spells uh, rather than having to add in the smaller increments, right?
because as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast for the terrain rules, you're really not supposed to see more than 12 all that often.
Uh,
So the fact that it needs all these little tiny increments for what should be corner situations of seeing really far,
mm-hmm.
it just, as I said before, corner situations shouldn't need that many extra rules to be dealt with.
Yeah. And
And just that much
especially, yeah,
memorization
like
to have to deal with them.
14, 16, 18, I feel like you could have just folded that into 16,
You could just,
right?
yeah, you jump
Or
from
12, right? And just looking at the spells, like a grenade, it would be fine at 12 inches, right?
You go from 12, 16, then the maximum of 24.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that would have been fine, and it would help me not have to memorize. Oh, I'm casting grenade. Oh, that's actually not. That's 14. Oh, I'm casting fireball. Oh, that's 16. Oh, I'm casting
Strike dead.
strike dead is 12. No, 8
Yep.
is 8. Oh, I'm casting what's last? So Bones of the Earth, that is 18. Yeah, if it was just 12, 16, 6, 12, 16, I think you could, maybe it's not exactly the thing, but it basically covers things out. And literally, once people are playing with it, they don't even remember that, before it would be a different distance, and it just ends up making sense, whichever number you choose. A lot of the times, they're a little bit arbitrary. As long as the range is overall, there's an option for that range, the difference is generally arbitrary.
Yeah. So,
And there's a lot of other things you can do to tweak the kind of thing. So I felt like that was one thing that a little bit of negative, just adding the extra memorization and stuff for the different spells. Yeah.
Oh well, that's
Yeah. There's also something about there's a little bit that in the main rules too. There are some like limits that I'm like, oh, I don't think like I mentioned the gang up rule, although I could agree that maybe it's better they have both. But there's a couple of other things where I'm like, maybe you don't need those limits. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So why don't we just to finish this off? Let's go through. I just want to go through the different parts of the book and the different spells and things, and just like almost like a top 10 list of favorite and least favorite, right? Or just a list of things. So first things first is the first thing we talked about. One of the first things we talked about is the art. So, what, in your opinion, is your favorite piece of art?
Well, as I said, I basically printed off giant chunks of the book.
Uh-huh.
So without going and reading through it now, it would be there is one piece I know is my favorite, but I can't off the top of my head remember it. So, anyways, I don't know if that helps our listeners much either because so
Okay, I will describe my favorite one is that that I really liked is the picture. There's a picture of a wizard who is using parchment or books to walk up to get to the top of a library to
so
get like a top shelf book without using those long ladders that generally
that
on
would be
bookshelves.
the new bridge spell, I guess.
Yes, that's the new bridge spell, right? The idea of the new bridge spell. So it's a specific spell, but just the art, that's the thing that really made me like say, oh, wow, this is actually pretty cool and characterful and different. Like, whereas in the old one, there's a lot of combat stuff just happening. This one is like really characterful and sells the idea, right? It's literally not a combat. It's not about the fighting, but it evokes the spell, how it works, and then it also is just an interesting look into what the wizards are trying to do, right? Pick up treasure. And then on top of that, the new design for this is it's the Sigilist, right? So this is a different design for the Sigilist I found really great and interesting. So the characters' costume is great, the spell is great, and just the art, the atmosphere is great for that one. So that's my favorite piece. And I think that's going to be a lot of people's favorite piece, I think.
Okay.
All right. You're looking up your favorite piece right now?
I am. I might be able to find it. I might not be able to. Every time I went back and looked for it, I would keep missing it.
All right.
Even when I was reading the book the first time.
My second favorite piece is the new Greater Demon. It's just a picture of a monster, and I just found like the monster really interesting, and it looks like a demon, right? It's a big long-limbed monster, and I just with like bumpy, scaly kind of skin. I just really liked the look coming out of I think a
Different
portal.
than the demon warrior who's carrying the sword and shield.
Yes, it's different than that one. Yeah, so it's literally just a big red ass demon with claws and shit, and I just like the look of it.
Nice.
So that was my second favorite piece.
Okay. So other things you really liked? I guess the special soldiers we already said. We really liked the restriction.
Here we go. Okay, so one thing that we didn't talk about is the fact that with the differentiation of the specialist soldiers and the standard soldiers, a bunch of like the standard soldiers are not just thugs, right? There's a bunch of other ones that are interesting, right, in standard, and especially if you look into the expansion books, a lot of the other soldiers that were of marginal use are now useful because they're standard soldiers, right? Because you'd always use the specialist version of that soldier, whereas now, like a man-at-arms is actually pretty good for a standard soldier. So here's my question. What is your favorite standard soldier?
Oh, it's probably the man-at-arms, but then I've got to start trying out the Apothecary, but I think the Apothecary is more when you play a certain play style, which I don't believe is my play style. So I think I'm going to be big on just thieves and man-at-arms.
All right, so the idea is like a thief now is actually useful. You want to keep in warband because he's a standard soldier that moves 7, and a man-at-arms is just good at holding the line. They're like a mini knight, basically, right?
Yeah,
they're a little bit less good at fighting, a little bit less tough, but they do move 6, which helps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a solid choice. Yeah, I think you mentioned my favorite, which is the Apothecary. So the issue with the Apothecary before is that you kind of just want to have 7 rangers instead.
Yes, keep the space with them.
But now that like I can't just fill my warband with rangers and be a dirty tryhard. Now I want to take that Apothecary, right? Who every once in a while I did take in the previous game, but now I'm like, yeah, this is a solid choice. So when my wizard casts their spells and like cuts themselves to be able to pull off a big spell, my Apothecary can be like, here, sir, have a potion and feel better.
Yeah, because someone has to pick up the treasure all the time, and often 2 of the treasures will be close to you.
Mhm.
So you don't have to run super fast to get those.
Mhm.
So maybe your apothecary goes over, grabs those, and
Yes.
then for the rest of the game, because you don't want to be fighting with your treasure carrying dude,
Mhm.
then switch to just have the apothecary heal you, then its
Yeah.
job is done.
Yeah, so basically, the way I did it was in a previous game is I used my apothecary. Uh, I used a thief to pick up a treasure, and then during the battle, like my wizard would cut to be able to cast spells, and then my apothecary went over and healed up my wizard, and then the person that was carrying my treasure dropped the treasure in a safe spot, and then my apothecary just bolted to pick up the treasure and leave after he used his potions, which is I don't know. I feel like it makes sense for the apothecary, and it worked great.
Yeah.
And now that it's not taking up the spot of a ranger of Aragorn, it's fine. It's great. All right. Uh, I haven't looked over all the new missions, so I don't think we can say what is your favorite new mission.
No, I haven't looked through them either. I just like playing them. I like that they're a surprise.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Okay, what is your favorite new spell? Brand new spell. Do you know?
Oh, not revised spell.
Yeah, that'll be the next question.
So la la la. Read through. I have written down a whole bunch of the changes. Suggestion I thought was quite interesting, but I don't think I would declare it as my favorite. I think not bridge. Oh, so True Sight is now new, is it not?
No, it's not new. It's
No.
that's a revised one. You know what?
Oh,
Fine.
okay.
Favorite
So
revised spell?
favorite revised spell.
Oh, that's not your favorite revised spell either. But it's interesting, but not your favorite. Okay. Favorite new spell
I,
first. Favorite new spell first. We'll finish that up topic and then we'll go to favorite revised spell.
oh, it's probably suggestion. Honestly, I've looked through the whole thing right
Suggestion's
now.
cool. I like
It's
suggestion. Uh, so suggestion is the one that makes your opponent makes the person drop the treasure and then you can move them 3 inches, which is
yes.
interesting. For me, I feel like the two ones that are interesting to me are draw the blink spell, which is you cast on someone, and then they randomly move 4 inches in a random direction, which I find kind of hilarious. The idea that you're like, oh, I'm falling beyond. Maybe I should just try and blink them. Or the other thing is, what happens if you blink someone on a bridge?
Oh yeah, they'll fall off.
That's awesome.
Yeah, on your boards, you have lots of bridges, which
Yeah,
makes it happen. Not everybody's boards are gonna have all the bridges.
but
So.
now they should because it's awesome to blink someone on a bridge. So it's either that one or the one I just mentioned before, animate skull. I think both of those are interesting. All right. Actually, the thing that was a lot more that there were a lot more of is the revised spells. So what's your favorite revised spell?
I think it's Poison Dart, only because I'm biased because I wanted to play a witch. And
Uh-huh.
as their direct attack spell, it didn't cause any damage before,
Yeah.
which made it trash. You don't want trash shooting spells, especially in the previous edition. Well, no,
Yeah.
even as we said in this edition, you have less shooting from your soldiers. So now you want it from your wizard. Thus, you
Yeah.
really
So it changed from I think it was a +5, but if it hits the person, they just lose an action, right? Which is poison. It's the poison rule. Now the new one is it's only +3, but that's a damage spell first of all. So that but if you damage them, they also still lose that action. So you get like 2 less chance of damaging them, but you actually damage them. So you can kill someone with it if you need to.
Yeah.
And then it also slows them down. So like if they have a treasure, like a treasure guy who's like low health, you can like a thief, which is not that high fight. It definitely makes sense to shoot that thing, right, to stop them from going anywhere. Yeah, it's a great spell. I am also there's so many different spells that are so interesting, right? So I liked I liked the change to leap, which is actually a debuff, but it's literally the one that we implemented.
Where you can't leap at full speed when you're carrying treasure to just get
Yes,
away.
exactly. Yeah, I like that, and I like the new Fool's Gold, which technically it's an entirely new spell, actually. Right? It doesn't act like the old spell at all, even though it has the same name. But my favorite one is Curse. Again, a witch spell. So it used to be that Curse, it gives them a -1 to all the rolls, but they get a will roll to resist it. Right before you, like when you cast it, they have a will roll to resist it, and then only if it succeeds, they get a -1 to all rolls. Now, it goes off no matter what. It gives them a -2, and it gives them a -2 to all the rolls, which is very, very strong. If you cast it on your wizard, that person has -2 for the entire round, and then only at the very end of the round can they roll the will roll to resist it.
Yeah, before it was -1, but
The,
you could get it to stack, but that'd be so many casting rolls.
yeah,
And so your time spent to try
exactly.
to stack it, it
So
wasn't worth it.
so now not only does it happen immediately, but it also without a will roll affecting them for at least that turn, it starts off with -2. So again, a great new witch spell. I really like the witch got, I think, 3 buffs. The animal companion, by the way, I posted this on the Frostgrave forums, and Joe responded. You can take a barbarian as not barbarian. You can take the new bear as a standard creature, which is really strong because the new bear is better than a specialist creature. So you can only take 1 animal companion, but it takes up a standard slot, and that standard creature is now stronger than a specialist creature, which is now really good.
It's better than one of your specialists.
Yeah, so now I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So the witch got a lot of buffs, which is kind of crazy because witch was my favorite before. But to be fair, fog became weaker. So
yeah, it goes away more easily. So.
Yeah, it goes away more easily, so you can't just fog up and like hide behind that. So there got a little bit weaker, but like 3 of other spells became stronger, which is
overall it became better.
Now it's just like, which spell do you want to choose? That's a witch. You can only choose 3 of them to start with. Yeah. All right. Now I did mention there were 3 or 4 spells that I felt weren't that great. So I do want to say, because I'm always about, apparently my friends say I'm always about the negativity and tearing things down. What is the spell, your least favorite spell now? Either the one that you wish could have changed, or one where you think the change was not to your liking? Or maybe even yep.
I think the scatter shot before we found was kind of weak.
Yeah.
And it just stayed really weak. You want to be able to scare your opponent. If they try and surround you, it's actually really scary.
Yeah. So scatter shot is a spell that like allows you to attack everyone within 12 inches and line of sight, which sounds strong, except that it's like a +0 attack, and they get cover from it, which basically means like even if you're surrounded by 6 or 7 guys, you're going to do like generally 1 or 2 damage.
And before, did Scattershot actually need line of sight? It was just an area effect before.
So we used to play. So at the very beginning, it was actually decent because we played it that it did not need line of sight, and it ignored cover because it didn't need line of sight. Right? It's just a magic attack. But then it got errated at some point to be needing line of sight and a magic attack, and that basically nerfed it into oblivion, and it became useless after that. And even when it didn't require line of sight, because it was you had to shoot it within 12 inches, that means your wizard had to be within 12 inches of all these people, which if like 5, to make it useful, if 5 people were within 12 inches of your wizard, you're kind of a little bit in trouble.
Yeah, because Wanda may be closer, which means now they can run into combat with
Yeah,
you, and
exactly.
that's the end of your casting.
And it's only plus 0 fight, so actually the chances of it winning a lot of people. It was, don't get me wrong, it was a good spell when that we thought that's the way the rules were, but because there was the rata that meant it needed line of sight, and it was a ranged attack, which means players got cover. The chances of it actually doing damage dropped dramatically. Like you're
Yeah,
literally fishing for a 20 to damage someone.
yeah, and especially because the Elementalist has so many other good spells
Yes,
that you're
exactly. You
really
almost always
comparing
would
it.
rather shoot a fireball.
Yeah,
And it required the same casting roll. And a fireball, you target a guy and everyone with 1.5 gets hit by it. It was a similar thing, easier to cast, has longer range. It was just generally better. Although technically the new fireball is only 16-inch range, so maybe the scatter shot is slightly more like the narrowing of the difference is slightly closer, but I still don't see anyone like want that. I don't see why anyone would take scattershot when you can use fireball.
yeah. So, is there anything else you think might take the top rank for spell
I think
that
scattershot is
underwhelms?
literally the worst spell now.
Most underwhelming. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other ones are the other. Uh,
So there's some situational ones. I guess if you're playing through missions where you're mostly dealing with undead or controlling animals.
those are actually really good when they come up. And now you got
Well,
to
actually,
think,
now that more monsters come on, now it's
yeah,
more than twice as likely the monster comes on. It means more than
yeah,
twice as likely you just got control of some creature.
yeah. So it actually is significantly more useful than it
So to
was
be fair,
before. And yeah,
it just doubled in
and they are
usefulness. So
marginal spells, right? The idea is you have that spell, it's in your back pocket, and it doesn't happen always, but when it happens, it's very good, right?
yeah, if you know you're playing that campaign, that's the Lich Lord that's full
Oh
of
yeah,
undead.
control
You're
undead
like,
is so good in the Lich Lord.
yes, please. We'll build this demon control
Yeah,
or undead control.
and technically control animal, like there's a lot of animals in the base thing, so
Yeah.
it's also quite a good one. I
So
think
I think one of
control's
the
construct is the least good one out of those.
yeah. So I think one of the other underwhelming ones that only got a tiny buff was Explosive Rune,
No, it
where
got a
you play
huge buff.
where you can go within 4 inches of it.
Yeah, that's a huge buff. The biggest problem before was if you laid the rune, you couldn't move and then lay the rune down because it's base to base contact, which means if anyone moves within base contact of it, it blows up in your face. Now
Yeah.
you can move, lay it in front of you, and if they try and come up on you, if they try and like engage you, they get hit by the rune. And you don't get hit by the rune, which is a huge buff.
Yes.
I think it actually makes it useful.
Yep.
Whereas before it was like so hard to use well, right? It's like you're defending where you used to be. So like I guess if you're retreating, it's useful, but like
Yeah. So now before it was just laying mines, which was quite underwhelming, but now you can actually like lay the mine in front of you.
yeah, to protect you from moving after you've moved, which is
You don't have to move away. You can be in cover shooting
yeah,
things, and then rather than having to expose yourself, place it, then come back, you can just lay it out
yeah,
for your
exactly.
opponent to hit on the way in and
Yeah,
not
you
hit
don't have to
yourself.
put it where you used to be. You can put it where in front of you to protect you from them advancing on you, which is a big
Yeah.
thing. I think the three weakest ones I thought were scatter shot. What's the other one? Like the explosion version of the elementalist, where you have to
It's
be
not,
like within 3 inches,
it's
and
not
it does a
grenade.
+5
Grenade was
magic
for.
attack. It's like a +5 magic attack against every other person within 3 inches. And again, that's just like so marginal because uh
Once you're surrounded by enough guys to make that worth it, you're in so much trouble that you should really be
yes. Yeah,
considering something
exactly. It's
else.
still weaker than the shoot attack of elemental bolt. And you have to be within 3 inches of them. And then you if you it's only +5, so it might not kill them. And in general, if the enemy has gotten within 3 inches of you, there's most of those cases they've also just engaged you.
Yeah, so that's destructive sphere we're talking about.
Yeah, destructive sphere. So and when you're engaged, you can't even cast a spell. So you're kind of
So the
screwed.
most useful situation to cast this in? No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. So I felt like that spell is still underwhelming. Again, you can have elemental bolt. Why would you use that one? And then the other one is Strike Dead. I think Strike Dead basically has all of these limits. This is the one that only costs you again. There's range issues because you can only cast it within 8 inches. And then on top of that, you take a damage to cast it, and then basically it does damage. It damages the person you cast it on with the difference between their will roll and your casting roll, which is like minimum 14. So it's and the biggest issue is it starts off with a casting roll of 18.
Yes.
So
yeah. The question is it that much better than high plus shooting attacks?
Well, it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's just not going to be as good as Elemental Bolt. And you need to spend so many of your levels to even get it to a point that's usable. The only way I see it usable is like in a scroll, right? Yeah. Where it might be useful. But I guess it would be useful in that case. But again, that's not very useful. And then the other one, it's actually funny. My 4 least useful spells are from only two of the 10. Is the Necromancer's Bone Dart, which was double nerfed. So it used to be like always taken. It was a +5 shooting attack. It used to be an 8 cost +5 shooting attack. Now it requires a 10 to cast, which means to get it to the ease of casting level as it used to be, you have to spend 2 levels. And on top of that, it's only 12 inches.
Yes.
Literally cut its range in half.
Maybe the idea was to cut down the shooting part. I felt like
it's too much of a debuff. I felt like one or the other was probably enough to make it okay.
Well, maybe the idea is to have the Necromancer try and do other things other than just be a good shooter.
Like it did. That's the other thing. Like I just said, those 3 other spells are great, right? And it still has it has 2, in my opinion, not great spells, but still the other 8 spells it had, or 6 spells it has, are still great. So Necromancer is fine, right? But I wish Bone Dart only got one or the other of those nerfs. And maybe when we start playing it more, we'll change one of those, right?
Mm-hmm.
My preferred one is just change it back to 8 cost. But
okay, I would have gone with the range, but yeah.
Make it 10 cost and then 24? Maybe.
Yeah, cut the range
down one of those.
Anyhow.
Yeah. All right. So we did that. All right. I guess the last of the top 10, whatever, kind of favorites things. What is your new favorite wizard?
I was going to play Witch anyways, but I think
your favorite, or is it just the one that you wanted to play?
Just the one I want to play next because I built the models for it.
I've played so many different wizards, so.
Oh yeah, I played lots of different wizards. I played the Elementalist for a long time just because it was clearly extremely powerful from the powerful shooting spells I had before. So
yeah, Fireball, Elemental Bolt is fun. Wall, Fireball, Elemental Bolt still works.
So you're saying what seems to be the most interesting new one? I think the most interesting new one is the Chrono.
Well, they're all the same wizards. So just which one do you believe is overall your will become your new favorite? Even if the Witch is your next warband, what do you think would be your overall favorite? If you could only play one wizard until the end of time out of the 10.
I think with my playstyle, I just like the Elementalist's shooting power still.
Oh, okay.
His
shooting power is down. To be fair, all of his other spells are good. They just end up usually get cut out because the shooting ones were so good before. But the absorb attack and the elemental hammer are great spells as well.
Yeah, it was a good range of damage dealing.
Yeah.
He's not the most subtle thing to use, but
hey, it works. Fair enough. I think my favorite is now. I don't think it's changed. I guess people just gravitate to one kind of type of play style, but the Witch is my favorite. It was my favorite before, and now it was my favorite before with using only a few spells, and But now, like, all of the spells that I really, really wanted to use, but were just not very good, are now good. Like Animal Companion, Curse, and Poison Dart. They're so good now that, like, I'm really excited to, like, my next warband is not going to be a witch, but going back to it, that's definitely my favorite now. I feel like I get to be the witch that I always wanted to be. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So overall, you want to summarize last impressions, last thought of Frostgrave Second Edition?
I think it's going to get lots more people to play just because it's more approachable with fewer books.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think the game is great and arguably the best game out there that you can play. And so approachable to so many different people. Like,
yeah, as we keep saying on every other, we haven't said the word infinity yet this podcast, so we'll try to say it once. But infinity is like super deep, but the barrier to entry is also very high for that reason and for the difficulty in acquiring models reason. Yeah. So it's hard to get people into infinity, but getting people into this game, very easy.
Mm-hmm. And it's wizard, so your D&D like it's medieval, so your D&D miniatures work. And you can play like with 3 or 4 people in one game, which is awesome. Although if they're all new, it's going to take you a little bit of time. But once you all can like know how to play, you can zoom through like a 3-player game in under 2 hours, which is great.
Yep.
And you get to put on all that terrain that you love. Like it just hits all the spots, and it's story based. Like it's very different than Infinity, right? Like you have the campaign play. It totally sells it. Like if you're into D&D and you kind of want something a little bit more competitive, right? So you can kind of smack your friends, but you still like the leveling up idea and the story-based kind of game. But you don't also want to dive into like super deep games. Like Frostgrave is definitely right up your alley.
Yeah, and you really like the mini aspect of the games.
Yeah, and Second Edition is just so much tighter in general.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, if you've gotten into Frostgrave or you want to get into Frostgrave, if you have any other questions, give us a shout. Find us on our Facebook group or go to our website or do all those kind of things.
Yeah, let us know what you're positive or negative about. We were actually highly positive this time.
I know. I'm going to send this podcast to all of my friends who are like, oh, you're so negative. You always talk about negative stuff about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so even though we did fit in some negative stuff, still overwhelmingly positive. Yeah. All right. Yeah. This has been Alan.
Yeah, it's been Brandon.
All right, one more thing.
So if you enjoyed that podcast and want to listen to more, you can find them over at diceovereverything.com
or on your favorite podcast app.
And if you want to leave a comment, message, or ideas for like more podcasts from us, or
just get in touch with us
at Facebook and look for Dice Over Everything there.
All right. Bye.